guys suck. I hate you guys.
Okay.
Anyway, Alex Baldwin, he did acting. He was on Leave It to Beaver. He was on the Addams Family. This is a big guy. He did The Price is Right. This is one of the biggest top celebrities, and he, has been in the headlines lately.
What do you?
Of course,
because that was a very, very odd choice of pop culture references that are in no way related whatsoever, nor is any of that true.
Listen,
So for anybody that's
shot a guy.
Yeah, anybody. Well, no, he shot 2 people. For anybody locked in a cave, they were filming. They had a scene. He had to draw a single action revolver and cock and not fire it, apparently. Mm-hmm. But he did fire it, and or it fired itself. Ooh, this is up to debate. Okay. But what was not supposed to be there was a live round, which apparently was there. It went through. I can't remember their rules now. It was a woman who was not a director, but maybe cinematographer of some sort. I can't.
Yeah, the director of cinematography.
And then it went into the shoulder of the person behind her, who was he the director? I honestly don't remember their roles now. 2 people behind a camera. And so the one was killed, the man was injured, and they pulled a bullet apparently out of his shoulder. And a lot of that information has been released to the media now, including the initial police interview with Alec Baldwin. Mm-hmm. And they actually released some of the footage of the scene before the gun went off. Actually, apparently supposedly they released it with the gun going off, but I can't find any of that. And the family's upset that they actually released that footage, but I can't find it because it's being, sort of censored for family audiences by the news media, and I'm not sure where they released this packet for public consumption.
So this is the rehearsal of the draw.
Right. So Alec Baldwin's supposed to draw the revolver from concealment in his coat, cock it, and point it threateningly. He describes this in his interview with the police, and he says, he didn't touch the trigger. And the problem is the one bit of footage that we have is he's definitely riding that trigger. His finger is on it the whole way through. When he cocks the gun, you can I believe it's kind of hard, it's going fast, but I believe you can even see some bounce back of him riding the trigger.
Yeah, we're showing it right now.
Yeah. You'd have to really slow it down, but.
Right. And the location, this is really difficult though, because a lot of the, internet gun commentators were looking at this and making for one, these shots that we're looking at now are not the shot, right?
Theoretically, they're supposed to be. It's not supposed to be the moment the gun went off, but this is supposed to be where the camera was positioned.
No. I mean, not the time. You know what I'm saying?
It's supposedly that he puts it right back in his coat, does it again, and it goes off.
This camera shot is not the gun shot, is what I was trying to say.
No, but this is the practice for the exact gunshot that happens seconds later, apparently, according to how this is worded.
Right. And so people are obsessing and fixating on that his finger is on the trigger. And people are opining that they're saying 2 things. Well, one, that there's no possible way that the gun could have accidentally gone off from him thumbing the hammer. They're saying there's no possible way that it could have gone off without, pulling the trigger. And we'll talk about that. And then they're also saying that because his finger was on the trigger, he violated one of the 4 rules, and thus he's bad man, and he needs to, be punished.
Well, essentially, Alec Baldwin makes 2 claims. One, that it was the armorer's job to make sure the gun was empty and that he never inspected the gun. And it's just not his fault, period. And then 2, he did not fire the gun fired itself. So essentially, he's tried to put up 2 layers of defense to that he's responsible for this. And the one side of it, you can argue all day from a legal perspective as to who's ultimately responsible for the security and liability of this. As a gun owner, we have a different level of standard than a legal standard. You know what I mean? Because we're going to say, well, if you're handling a gun, you need to treat it like a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's another layer to this that's confusing the conversation people are having. But then third, a lot of guys are having this sort of mechanical conversation about what a single action army is and isn't. And because there's so many reproductions in the market, a lot of modern shooters are completely unaware of. They go by what is being marketed as a single action army, and they think this is a single action army, and mechanically it's quite distinct. And so they're not understanding the limitations of, not only do yes, he has a single action army in this footage. There's not enough footage for us to identify who made that. So that gun may or may not have the same lock work as an original single action army. It may have some sort of weird safety lock work that was put in later years from reproduction companies. Like it could be a number of things. And so everybody keeps trying to make these sort of total statements, and we just don't know.
Right. Yeah, no, there was a interview with what was his name? Mr. Jonathan Herrera and Rakita Law.
Yeah, Rakita Law and Herrera.
Yep. And they were, he had this, what you were calling a 3-click, which are more modern. And most of these 3-clicks have a trigger block or a hammer block of some sort.
Yeah, okay, so here's how it works. The Colt Single Action Army is literally a single action only revolver. You must cock the hammer and pull the trigger. The trigger has a sear surface that engages directly on the hammer, so there's no intermediary sear whatsoever. Because of that direct connection, the only safety on an original would be what you would call the rebounded and half cock positions. There's two. So if you start pulling back the hammer on a single action army, the first click that you hear is going to be a rebounded position that keeps the firing pin away from the primers. But
that's only about like an eighth of an inch or more away from
if it's very short. And that's where you would normally carry the pistol, with the hammer mostly down, but not be able to touch a primer. And in that regard, the gun would be quote unquote safe unless it was dropped directly on the hammer spur very harshly and cracked or somehow deformed that sear surface, which can happen. So the next click you would hear would be the half cock position. In this position, you can't pull the trigger just like in the rebound position, so it's also a safety position, but the cylinder is free to rotate. That allows you to load and unload the pistol safely. Then the next click you hear, because they call it a 4-click, is actually what's called a locking bolt. It's the cylinder stop engaging, which holds the cylinder aligned with the barrel. And then the 4th click is the actual full cock position. That's the sear clicking into the hammer, and then that's at full cock. So what people don't understand about single action armies is that because of the two, the rebound position and the half cock safety position being capable of taking a lot of damage. So if you drop the gun onto its hammer while it's resting in one of those positions, you start deforming the sear surface, especially with old metallurgy, not necessarily new metallurgy, but I've seen poor reproductions that do the same thing. I've handled a number of these guns over the years that have had problems with the sear surface. And once you start deforming the sear surface, even if you don't crack, because you can hardcore crack off one of those notches if you're not careful. But even without cracking it, you can smear that trigger sear surface in just such a way that sometimes it engages, but it engages very gently. And if you rock the hammer or you ride it just wrong, it'll slip. And sometimes it just wears down to the point that it doesn't really engage at all, and you can cock the gun all the way back and you let go and the hammer just falls. However, the prop company should be responsible for making sure that doesn't happen. So that would be a liability on the prop company's side. However, again, that doesn't really make sense. Why would you ever have a live round in the thing with a camera in front of you, no matter whether you trusted the hammer or not? So it's this huge stack of people confusing issues. The short answer is yes, a Colt 1873 can fail mechanically in several ways. Not just the sear, you could also have the trigger return spring fail. I've seen them fail too. And then at that point, because there's no direct pressure on the trigger, you would not have a full cock and you would slip and fire. However, it's far more likely, given the footage that we're seeing, that Baldwin would just rode the trigger, because in a Colt single action army, if you just hold the trigger back, the hammer will just fall. Nothing catches it, which is why you hear that's what people would say. Fanning the hammer. You would hold the trigger down and just pop that hammer back. So mechanically, yeah, something can break. It probably didn't, but to sit here and say that it fundamentally can't is also a little bit weird. And why would you even involve that in the story?
Right. And I guess since you kind of brought in legal standards and liability here, we have to remember there's two different areas of law that this could be involved with, right? There's criminal liability, which is what a lot of people are clamoring for, and there's civil liability. To be criminally liable for something like this, there's a scienter element involved, where and scienter meaning you had it's the guiltiness of your mind, it's your intention. So on all the way down at the bottom level, negligent homicide, it's that you were behaving under the circumstances in such a way that is objectively negligent. Objectively, you are not putting in enough care. And that has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt to be, again, criminally liable for a negligent homicide. I don't know how it's specifically defined in whatever state that this happened in. I just feel that, especially on a criminal level, all of the different levels of people that were involved here completely obviates a criminal analysis. So I don't even think there's a point in discussing whether or not he's criminally liable. I think he's obviously not. In terms of civil liability, that's a different thing, because I do think that this was his production, wasn't it? Like,
to my understanding, yes.
He was a producer on the production.
Well, so then even when people say, "Oh, well, you know, that's on the prop house, that's on the director of, you know, their armor or whatever," well, still the one who hired them, and he may have negligently hired them.
Now the question is, would there be a pass-through lawsuit, though? Essentially, so in other words, you would sue Alec Baldwin as the producer and owner of the show, essentially, and then he would then have to sue the prop company for those same damages, because ultimately they were supposed to absolve him of that liability.
So those are, yes, that would be him making another claim, which he can do, to try to mitigate some of the damages that would go against himself. But given the nature of the production, it seems to me like it wouldn't be necessary, right? Like the plaintiffs wouldn't need to attach liabilities to all those different companies, because
no, they would. A lot of people don't understand this on the law too. You target who is the agent to you. So if the harmed party didn't have a contract with the armorer, they had a contract with the production company, then the production company would be who they went up against. And then the production company, if they were wronged by the armorer, would then go after the armorer for the same amount, which is very unsatisfying to people, but that's the way the custody works in these things.
Yes, and that actually does change on a state-by-state basis. And generally, you don't need contractual privity anymore to recover against a company, especially in a situation involving something where there's foreseeable risks to other people beyond the scope of the contract, as would certainly be the case here. And you know, some states have joint and several liability. Some states have different forms of liability. Like some states have it to the point where you could only sue him for the percentage that he was at fault. But in most jurisdictions, you can basically recover 100% against this guy, because that's the one you picked, and then it's up to him to be like, okay, you screwed up too. You come here, you know. And that's just the nature of the way these things work. And all of that to say, the people who are saying, "Oh no, he's not responsible, it's the prop company or whatever," well, he hired him.
But it is a little interesting, because people are trying to argue whether he's responsible or not in the moment of pulling the trigger or not pulling the trigger, being the guy with the gun. But it's weird. His responsibility is actually less the fact that he was the man with the gun. That's how we see it as shooters.
Right.
But in a legal sense,
yeah. Like I think that Baldwin, the actor, probably should be held blameless, like, because he was doing his job as an actor. But I think Baldwin, the producer, has a lot of stuff coming for him.
Yeah, as a human being, like, I don't think he's culpable. Meaning, I don't think that he has a guilty mind and ought to have a guilty conscience. Although he, you know, certainly feels guilt, I would presume. You know, I don't know how actors think.
There is one potential change in this, which is that I have heard whispers, and I have not been able to confirm, that the armorer was not alerted that they were using the firearm for filming in that moment. And so it may be that the actor took a firearm without the confirmation from the armorer and used it in a scene, at which point then this would sort of, again, Baldwin in trouble, but it would flip down to that lower level that people are like, well, he's responsible because he had the gun. It's like, yeah, actually, at that point, if you're taking the gun without the expert's opinion, the problem is on a direct as the shooter basis. If you're being told you're just a lowly actor, here is a professional armorer, and they're telling you it's okay to use this like a prop, you have a lot of legal defense there as the actor, you know.
So do you think this
is supposed to be it?
This is it.
Matt showed me a piece of evidence. The only problem I have with this is Baldwin in his own interview said that he selected a brown-handled revolver with wood grips, and this is a black plastic gripped, very dark revolver. Do we have that?
Well, any number of things could have happened, but this is,
well, we have the immediate footage. I don't know if we can make out the brown grips or not, but I always am careful because I just don't really trust the
and you know, this was picked from I'll be honest, this was picked from an article that is not entirely trustworthy, but you know, assuming it is something like it, assuming arguendo that this is the gun, it looks quite clapped out.
Yeah, I would be really. As a matter of fact, if you look at this one,
and this is legit wear too. Like it's not. You can tell it's not just corner polishing.
No. If this is the gun, you can even see that the screw for the locking bolt has been replaced at some point because that's not even a factory screw.
Right.
But this would be a really weird choice for a prop gun for this kind of production because it doesn't. I mean, it's just jet.
It's
black.
not right.
Yeah, it does. It's like a post 1891 cross pin and all sorts of stuff going on with it that just doesn't seem right for a good cowboy movie.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I was just looking at the footage of Baldwin and I was remarking to myself how dark the footage is and how they had to put a light on each side of the barrel of the gun just to set it apart, just to actually have it show up in the footage, just that rim light from both sides, just to outline the barrel and actually make it visible in the scene.
Here's a still from the scene.
Yeah.
Can you make out the color of the grip at all?
I cannot.
Yeah, it's very tricky.
Let me go back to.
I just went through it and I couldn't tell.
The point being though is this needs to be like the problem is a lot of people are jumping the gun on what they are saying happened because everybody wants to sort of be an overnight expert on firearms.
Right.
And it's just like, well, hold on. I know you think you know what a single action army is, but in the modern context, we don't have a lot of consistency.
Yeah, we have no idea what this gun is on the inside. But I mean, in either event, though, it is possible for mechanical surfaces to fail in such a way that, that this could have happened accidentally without touching the trigger.
Right.
We're not saying necessarily that he didn't. The other interesting thing that he said was that he didn't perceive recoil when he fired it.
Yeah, but that can be whenever
shock.
Yeah, a lot of people don't notice it in shock. As a matter of fact, that's why I don't want to be morbid, but I really wanted to see the footage of the actual shot, which supposedly was released, because we would
you can see his wrist. Yeah,
we'd be able to perceive recoil. I mean, he has a very loose, relaxed grip on it. He has his finger resting on the trigger. He clearly doesn't think it's about to go off because he's holding it so relaxed. And I just seeing actors shoot, that's not the usual. Yes. There's just not enough resolution in this video for me to be able to see for sure if that's the same gun or not. But if that's the claimed prop gun, that's a pretty roughed up prop gun too.
Yeah, it's pretty legit. Clapped out, but we don't know what it is. We don't know anything. We're just a couple idiots on the internet. Hooray! Let's move on to the next story.
But everybody likes talking about this one and claiming that they know everything.
Yeah. True. I think Matthias and I might do a little bit of a video on this later on.
I really have debated just sort of being like, all right, here's the ways an 1873 can fail. I'm not saying it did.
Yeah.
But for God's sake, don't say they can't.
Well, I think we could combine it. You do that, and then we talk about the legal standard, and then to be like, hey. So do you get it now? No, I know. It's complicated.
This is why it has to go to court.
Yeah. It's hard. Right. Anyway, have you ever gone to the gun store and been so frustrated that there were no guns designed specifically for the biomechanics of your female hands?
Yeah, Springfield.